When a wealthy socialite humiliates a maid's daughter at an elite charity gala, she never imagined her own child would expose the devastating truth that would shatter her perfect world forever. Sometimes the most powerful voices come from the smallest mouths, and tonight, one 8-year-old's courage would change everything. The crystal chandeliers cast golden shadows across the marble floor of the Riverside Country Club, their light catching on champagne glasses and designer gowns. The annual Children's Education Foundation Gala was in full swing, and Margaret Pemberton moved through the crowd like royalty, her silk Valentino dress rustling with each calculated step. She was the event's chairwoman, after all, the woman who single-handedly organized the most prestigious charity event in the city. The sound of clinking silverware mixed with polite laughter as servers weaved between tables adorned with white orchids. Margaret surveyed her domain with satisfaction, nodding graciously at the mayor's wife, exchanging air kisses with the hospital board president. Everything was perfect. Absolutely perfect. "Excuse me, ma'am," a gentle voice interrupted her thoughts. Margaret turned to see a young woman in a simple black uniform, one of the catering staff. The girl couldn't be more than 28, with kind brown eyes and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. She held a small tablet in her hands, clearly nervous. "What is it?" Margaret's tone carried the dismissive edge she reserved for the help. "There's an issue with the auction system. The bidding software crashed, and we're supposed to start in 10 minutes. I overheard you talking to the tech coordinator, and I think I might—" "Think you might what?" Margaret's laugh was sharp, cutting through the ambient chatter. "Honey, this is a $50,000 auction management system. Unless you have a degree in computer science tucked away in that little apron of yours, I suggest you find someone qualified." The young woman, her name tag read Linda, flushed but stood her ground. "Actually, ma'am, I do have experience with auction platforms. If you'd just let me take a look at the server configuration—" "Server configuration?" Margaret's voice rose, causing nearby guests to turn. "Listen, dear, I appreciate the enthusiasm, but this isn't some garage sale software. We have actual professionals handling this. Now, shouldn't you be clearing tables or something?" Linda's cheeks burned, but she nodded quietly and stepped back. As she walked away, Margaret caught the disapproving look from Mrs. Richardson, the school superintendent's wife. She quickly smiled and waved, as if nothing had happened. But someone else had been watching, too. From behind a column, 8-year-old Emma Pemberton observed the entire exchange with wide, troubled eyes. Her small hands gripped her juice glass tightly, knuckles white with tension. 20 minutes later, the auction still hadn't started. Margaret found herself in heated conversation with the event coordinator, a thin man named Bradley, who was sweating despite the air conditioning. "I don't understand," Bradley said, his voice strained. "The system worked perfectly during testing. Now, it won't even boot up. We're looking at a complete disaster here, Mrs. Pemberton. Without the auction, we'll lose over $200,000 in donations." Margaret's perfect composure began to crack. This gala was her reputation, her legacy. The Children's Education Foundation depended on these funds, and, more importantly, her social standing depended on this event's success. "There has to be something we can do," she hissed. That's when Linda appeared again, having finished clearing the dessert course. She approached hesitantly, her tablet still in hand. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I couldn't help but overhear. I've been looking at the error logs on the backup terminal, and I think the issue is in the database synchronization protocol. If you modify the connection string parameters and reset the cache allocation—" "Are you kidding me right now?" Margaret's voice cut through the air like a blade. Several heads turned again, but this time she didn't care. "We have a room full of donors waiting, and you think this is the time for some maid to play computer expert?" Linda's face went ashen, but she pressed on. "Ma'am, I'm not trying to overstep. I just know I can fix this. I've worked with this exact platform before." "Before what? Before you decided serving canapés was your calling?" Margaret's laugh was cruel now, theatrical. "Security cameras. People. I want to know how much damage this girl might have done. For all we know, she's the reason we're having problems in the first place." The accusation hung in the air like poison. Linda's eyes filled with tears, but she maintained her dignity, even as whispers began to ripple through the nearby crowd. "I would never," Linda began. "Save it," Margaret snapped. "Bradley, get her away from the technical equipment. Now." As Linda was escorted away, her head held high despite her humiliation, nobody noticed the small figure that had been watching from the shadows. Emma Pemberton had heard every word, seen every cruel smirk, witnessed every moment of her mother's public destruction of an innocent woman. What they didn't know was that Linda Chen wasn't just any server. What they didn't know was that behind those kind brown eyes lay a mind that had once revolutionized database architecture for Fortune 500 companies. What they didn't know was that 8 years ago, she had been the youngest senior systems analyst at Technicore Industries, before love and sacrifice had led her down a different path. And with just one phone call from Emma later that night, Margaret, Pemberton was about to learn that sometimes the most devastating truths come from the smallest voices. Because sometimes the people we dismiss as invisible hold the power to change everything. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, I need your help. If you believe everyone deserves respect, regardless of their job title, hit that subscribe button right now. We're building a community that celebrates the hidden heroes among us, the people whose worth goes far beyond their paychecks. Rate this story from 0 to 10 in the comments. How angry did Margaret make you? And here's what I want to know. Have you ever witnessed someone being dismissed or underestimated because of their position? Share your story below because your experiences matter. This story gets more shocking as it unfolds. By the end, you'll see how one child's courage and a mother's past collide to create justice in the most unexpected way. Trust me, what happens next will blow your mind. But first, let's discover who Linda really was and why she was serving champagne instead of running boardrooms. Linda Chen had been working at the Riverside Country Club for 3 years, arriving each morning at 5 a.m. to help prep for private events, and staying until the last champagne flute was washed and stored. She moved through the opulent halls with quiet efficiency, her black uniform crisp and professional, her smile genuine despite the indifference she often faced from the wealthy clientele. The members walked past her as if she were part of the furniture, a polite smile here, a dismissive nod there. She had grown accustomed to being invisible, to existing in the spaces between their conversations about stock portfolios and European vacations. Linda watched everything, though. She always watched. There was something about observing from the margins that gave you clarity about people's true character. On this particular evening, Linda had arrived early to help with the gala setup. The Children's Education Foundation event was the club's most prestigious gathering, and she had volunteered for the overtime pay. Her daughter Sophie needed new school supplies, and every extra dollar mattered. As she arranged place settings and polished silverware, Linda heard fragments of conversations that revealed more than the speakers realized. Mrs. Pemberton's sharp, Instructions to the florist about the absolutely horrific centerpiece arrangements. Mr. Davidson's complaints about having to write another charitable tax deduction check. The casual dismissal of the Foundation's actual mission in favor of who would be photographed for the society pages. But Linda also heard the real conversations, the quiet ones between board members about underfunded schools, about children who couldn't afford basic supplies, about teachers buying classroom materials with their own salaries. These were the conversations that mattered, the ones that reminded her why she was here. When the auction system crashed, Linda had been refilling water glasses at the tech station. She couldn't help but notice the error messages flashing on the coordinator's screen. Database timeout errors, connection string failures, cache allocation problems. The terminology was as familiar to her as breathing. She had hesitated before approaching Mrs. Pemberton the first time. Linda knew her place in this world, understood the invisible barriers that separated the servers from the served, but children's education was at stake. $200,000 in donations hung in the balance. Her professional instincts had overridden her social conditioning. The humiliation that followed was worse than she had expected. Linda had endured countless moments of casual dismissal over the past 3 years. But this was different. This was public, deliberate, and designed to hurt. Standing there in front of the crowd, accused of potentially sabotaging the very system she knew she could fix, Linda felt something crack inside her chest. But she didn't fight back. She couldn't afford to fight back. As security led her away, from the technical area, Linda caught sight of a small face peering around a marble column. Emma Pemberton, just 8 years old, with her mother's sharp green eyes but none of her cruelty. The child was staring at Linda with an expression of confusion and distress that cut deeper than any adult's judgment. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and the crisis had been resolved by an emergency tech team from downtown at a cost of $5,000 and 2 hours of delay, Linda sat in the staff break room removing her uniform. Her shift supervisor, Janet Morrison, a kind woman in her 50s who had worked at the club for 15 years, approached her quietly. "I heard what happened tonight," Janet said, settling into the plastic chair beside Linda. "Margaret Pemberton can be difficult." Linda managed a weak smile. "It's fine. I should have known better than to speak up. Should you, though?" Janet's voice was thoughtful. "Linda, I've watched you for 3 years. You're different from the others. The way you talk, the way you handle yourself. Where did you work before here?" Linda was quiet for a long moment, folding her uniform with careful precision. She had never told anyone at the club about her past. It seemed easier to let them assume she had always been part of the service industry, had always existed in their peripheral vision. "It doesn't matter," she said finally. "It does, though." Janet leaned forward. "Tonight, when you were talking about database protocols and server configurations, honey, I've been around long enough to know the difference between someone who's read about computers and someone who's lived them. What aren't you telling us?" Linda looked up, meeting Janet's concerned gaze. In that moment, she saw something she rarely encountered anymore: genuine respect. Not pity, not curiosity, but actual human respect. "I used to work in technology," Linda admitted quietly. "Systems analysis, database architecture, platform integration. I was pretty good at it." Janet's eyes widened. "And now you're here serving cocktails to people who wouldn't recognize talent if it bit them. What happened?" Linda's hand unconsciously moved to the small silver locket she wore, hidden beneath her uniform collar. Inside was a picture of Sophie, at age 4, grinning, gap-toothed, and carefree. Life happened, Linda said simply. Sometimes you make choices that change everything. Sometimes love requires sacrifice. What Linda didn't say was that 8 years ago, she had been Linda Zhao, the youngest senior systems analyst in Technicore Industries' history. She had been on the fast track to vice president, commanding a six-figure salary and respect from colleagues twice her age. Her databases had managed millions of transactions for major corporations. Her algorithms had streamlined operations that saved companies hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. She also didn't mention that she had walked away from all of it when her sister Rose was diagnosed with cancer, leaving behind a 3-year-old daughter. Linda had promised Rose she would raise Sophie as her own, would give her the stable, loving home that mattered more than any career achievement. Taking care of Sophie meant working flexible hours, being available for school events, and accepting that her professional credentials meant nothing in a world that saw only her current circumstances. The country club job allowed her to support them both while being present for the little girl who had become her whole world. But tonight, watching Margaret Pemberton's casual cruelty, Linda felt something stirring that she had buried for years. That wasn't just embarrassment burning in her chest. That was righteous anger finally waking up. And sometimes, when righteous anger meets exceptional skill, extraordinary things happen. The following Tuesday morning, Linda arrived at the country club to find the atmosphere notably tense. The gala's technical disaster had become the talk of the membership, with whispers following Mrs. Pemberton wherever she went. The delayed auction had ultimately raised only 60% of its projected donations, and the board was asking pointed questions about event management. Linda was restocking the bar when she overheard a conversation between Margaret and the club president, Robert Harrison, near the main dining room. "The Children's Foundation is reconsidering their partnership with us," Robert was saying, his voice strained. "They're talking about moving next year's gala to the Metropolitan Hotel. Margaret, this is a disaster. We're looking at losing one of our biggest annual events." Margaret's response was sharp and defensive. "The technical failure wasn't my fault. We hired professionals, Robert. How was I supposed to know their system would crash? But the delay cost us nearly $80,000 in lost bids. Some of our biggest donors left before the auction even started." Linda paused in her work, a crystal tumbler frozen in her hands. $80,000 that could have bought textbooks, funded after-school programs, provided scholarships for deserving children. The waste of it made her chest tight with frustration. "I'm handling it," Margaret insisted. "I've already contacted 3 different event management companies for next year. This won't happen again." As the conversation continued, Linda found herself drawn closer, pretending to arrange napkins at a nearby table. The details they discussed revealed the true scope of the disaster. Not just the immediate financial loss, but the damaged relationships with corporate sponsors, the questioning of the club's competence, the potential domino effect on other charitable partnerships. That's when she heard Margaret say something that stopped her cold. "Honestly, Robert, the whole thing might have been sabotage. I had security review the footage, and that server girl was near the technical equipment earlier in the evening. For all we know, she deliberately caused the crash to make herself look like a hero when she offered to fix it." Linda's grip on the tumbler tightened. The accusation was so far from the truth, so deliberately malicious, that it took her breath away. Robert's voice carried a note of skepticism. "Margaret, that seems a bit far-fetched. Why would a server want to sabotage our event?" "Who knows? Maybe she was working for the competition. Maybe she wanted attention. The point is, we need to be more careful about who we trust around sensitive equipment." Linda felt her professional composure cracking. 8 years of swallowed pride, 8 years of invisible service, 8 years of watching incompetence masquerade as authority. It was all bubbling to the surface. Without thinking, she stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said quietly. Both Margaret and Robert turned, surprise flickering across their faces at the interruption. "The system failure wasn't sabotage," Linda continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "It was a cascade failure triggered by inadequate memory allocation in the bidding module. The auction platform was running on legacy infrastructure that couldn't handle the concurrent user load. A simple server configuration adjustment would have prevented the entire crisis." Dead silence filled the space between them. Margaret's face went through a spectrum of emotions: surprise, recognition, and then cold fury. "Excuse me." Margaret's voice was dangerously quiet. "Did you just interrupt a private conversation to lecture us about computer systems?" Linda felt the familiar weight of social hierarchies pressing down on her, but something had shifted. The injustice of the false accusation, the waste of desperately needed charitable funds, the casual cruelty she had witnessed. It all crystallized into a moment of clarity. "I'm trying to help," she said simply. "The Children's Foundation doesn't have to move their event. The technical problems are easily fixable if you implement proper system architecture. I could write up a comprehensive analysis of what went wrong and how to prevent it from happening again." Margaret's laugh was harsh and theatrical. "A comprehensive analysis? From a cocktail server? Robert, are you hearing this?" Robert Harrison looked uncomfortable, glancing between the two women. He was a reasonable man, Linda had observed, less prone to Margaret's dramatic displays of superiority. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked cautiously. Before Linda could respond, Margaret stepped forward, her voice rising. "Robert, this is exactly the kind of overstepping that caused problems in the first place. She's a server. She serves drinks and clears plates. We don't need her input on technical matters, and we certainly don't need her eavesdropping on board conversations." "I wasn't eavesdropping," Linda said, her voice gaining strength. "I was working 3 feet away from where you were discussing a charity losing $80,000 in desperately needed funding. Children will suffer because of that technical failure. If I can help prevent that from happening again, isn't it worth listening to what I have to say?" Margaret's face flushed with indignation. "The audacity is unbelievable. You're a member of the service staff, making accusations about our competence while offering unsolicited technical advice. This is completely inappropriate." "What's inappropriate," Linda said, the words coming out before she could stop them, "is allowing preventable technical failures to cost vulnerable children $80,000 in educational funding because you're too proud to listen to someone wearing the wrong uniform." The challenge hung in the air like electricity. Margaret's eyes narrowed, and Linda realized she had just crossed a line. There was no uncrossing. "That's enough," Margaret said coldly. "Robert, I think we need to have a conversation with HR about appropriate boundaries for service staff. This kind of insubordination can't be tolerated." Linda felt the familiar walls closing in, the reminder of her place in this carefully structured world. But for the first time in years, she didn't step back. "Mrs. Pemberton," she said quietly, "what if I could prove that I know what I'm talking about?" Margaret's smile was predatory. "Prove it? How exactly would you propose to do that?" Linda looked around the club's main dining room at the elegant tables, the crystal chandeliers, the oil paintings of long-dead members. This place represented everything she had walked away from: prestige, respect, recognition, but it also represented everything that was wrong with judging people by their appearances rather than their abilities. Give me 30 minutes. With the auction system documentation, Linda said. Let me show you exactly what went wrong and how to fix it. If I'm wrong, if I'm just a delusional server overstepping her bounds, then fire me. But if I'm right, she paused, meeting Margaret's eyes directly. If I'm right, then maybe you should ask yourself why you were so quick to dismiss someone who could have saved your event, your reputation, and $80,000 in children's funding. Margaret's face went white with rage, but before she could respond, a small voice cut through the tension. "Mommy, what's happening?" Everyone turned to see Emma Pemberton standing in the doorway, her school backpack still on her shoulders, confusion written across her young face. She had been coming to meet her mother after school, as she did every Tuesday. But Emma had heard everything, and the expression on her 8-year-old face suggested she was beginning to understand something her mother never intended her to learn. That evening, in her modest one-bedroom apartment in the Riverside Gardens complex, Linda sat at her small dining table with her laptop open and a cup of green tea growing cold beside her. The walls were decorated with Sophie's artwork from school and a few carefully chosen photographs, but tucked away in the bedroom closet was a box Linda hadn't opened in 3 years. Tonight, after the confrontation with Margaret Pemberton, she found herself kneeling on the closet floor, pulling out that weathered cardboard box with trembling hands. Inside were the remnants of Linda Zhao's professional life. Awards from the Database Administration Association, letters of commendation from corporate executives, a leather portfolio containing recommendation letters that praised her revolutionary approach to systems integration and unparalleled analytical capabilities. At the very bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, was a small crystal plaque. Technocore Industries, Senior Systems Analyst of the Year, Linda Zhao, 2016. She held the plaque up to the lamplight, watching the crystal catch and scatter the illumination. That woman, Linda Zhao, felt like someone from another lifetime. Someone who had commanded respect in conference rooms, whose opinions shaped million-dollar technology decisions, whose expertise was sought by Fortune 500 companies across the country. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been a gradual erosion of one identity and the careful construction of another. 8 years ago, Linda had been at the pinnacle of her career. At 27, she was the youngest senior analyst in Technocore's history, managing database architectures for clients like Boeing, Mercedes-Benz, and Goldman Sachs. Her algorithms processed billions of transactions annually. Her recommendations influenced technology budgets that dwarfed the GDP of small countries. She had been dating Michael Harrison then, a fellow technology professional with his own successful consulting firm. They had talked about marriage, about buying a house in the suburbs, about building the kind of power couple life that Silicon Valley magazines featured on their covers. The phone call that changed everything had come on a Tuesday morning in March. Rose, Linda's younger sister, calling from Seattle with news that would shatter both their worlds: Stage 3 pancreatic cancer, aggressive progression, and a 3-year-old daughter named Sophie who would need someone to care for her. "I'm not asking you to give up your life," Rose had whispered through tears during that first devastating conversation. "But Lily, she's going to need someone, and I don't have anyone else I trust." Linda had taken a leave of absence, telling herself it would be temporary. She would help Rose through treatment, make sure Sophie was cared for, and then return to her career once everything stabilized. Michael had been understanding, even supportive, talking about how they could make long-distance work until Rose was better. But cancer doesn't follow convenient schedules or respect career trajectories. Rose's condition deteriorated rapidly. The treatments were aggressive and exhausting, leaving her too weak to care for an energetic toddler who didn't understand why Mommy was always sick. Linda found herself becoming Sophie's primary caregiver, learning to braid pigtails and read bedtime stories while simultaneously managing Rose's medical appointments and insurance battles. The leave of absence stretched from months to a year. Michael's patience wore thin as Linda's attention was divided between her dying sister and a child who called her Auntie Lee and climbed into her bed during thunderstorms. The long-distance relationship crumbled under the weight of competing priorities and unmet expectations. Rose died on a snowy December morning, holding Linda's hand and making her promise to love Sophie as her own daughter. "She's yours now, Lee. Make her happy. Make her proud." The legal adoption process was complex and expensive. Linda drained her savings on lawyers and court fees while trying to maintain stability for a 4-year-old who had lost everything familiar. Moving back to California meant starting over. New schools, new pediatricians, new social circles. Returning to Technocore wasn't an option. The technology industry demanded total commitment, 80-hour weeks, and constant availability. Linda needed flexibility to be present for school plays, pediatric appointments, and the countless small moments that make up a child's life. She needed to be the parent Sophie deserved, not a distracted professional juggling career ambitions with family responsibilities. The country club job had been a practical choice. The hours were reasonable, the pay sufficient for their modest needs, and the work allowed Linda to be fully present when Sophie needed her. She convinced herself it was temporary, just until Sophie was older, just until they were more established. But temporary has a way of becoming permanent when you're not looking. 3 years of serving champagne to people who discussed million-dollar deals while she refilled their water glasses. 3 years of becoming invisible, of having her expertise dismissed as impossible given her current circumstances. 3 years of watching less qualified people make decisions she could improve while staying silent, because speaking up meant risking the stability Sophie needed. Linda set the crystal plaque down and opened her laptop. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with muscle memory, accessing technical documentation she hadn't looked at in years. The auction platform's architecture was antiquated, exactly as she had suspected. The cascade failure that had cost the High Children's Foundation $80,000 was entirely preventable with proper system configuration. She began to write, her analytical skills awakening like muscles stretching after a long sleep. Database schemas, server protocols, memory allocation strategies, the technical language flowed as naturally as breathing. Within 2 hours, she had produced a comprehensive analysis that identified 12 specific vulnerabilities in the current system and provided detailed solutions for each. As she worked, Linda felt something she hadn't experienced in years: the deep satisfaction of professional competence, the intellectual joy of solving complex problems, the quiet pride of expertise put to meaningful use. But more than that, she felt the stirring of righteous anger. Not just at Margaret Pemberton's casual cruelty, but at a system that judged people's worth by their current job titles rather than their capabilities. At a world that wasted talent because it came packaged in the wrong uniform. Sophie appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleepy eyes. "Aunt Linda? Why are you still awake?" Linda looked at the 8-year-old who had become her world. This beautiful child whose presence had rewritten every priority in her life. Sophie was worth every sacrifice, every compromise, every moment of professional invisibility. But tonight, Linda realized that loving Sophie didn't require erasing Linda Zhao entirely. "I'm working on something important, sweetheart," Linda said. softly. Something that might help a lot of children get better educations. Sophie padded over and climbed into Linda's lap, looking at the screen full of technical diagrams and code. "Are you really smart with computers, Aunt Linda?" Linda smiled, holding Sophie close. "I used to be. And you know what? I think I still am." Outside, the city slept. But in a modest apartment in Riverside Gardens, Linda Chen was remembering who Linda Zhao had been, and discovering who she might become again. This time, though, she wouldn't have to choose between professional competence and personal love. This time, she would find a way to honor both. Thursday morning dawned gray and drizzling, matching Linda's mood as she arrived at the country club for what might be her last day of work. Word had traveled quickly through the staff gossip network. Mrs. Pemberton was meeting with HR this afternoon to discuss appropriate disciplinary action for Linda's insubordination. Linda had spent the previous evening finalizing her technical analysis of the auction system failure. 47 pages of detailed documentation lay printed and bound in her locker, a comprehensive blueprint for preventing future disasters. Whether anyone would read it remained to be seen. The morning started normally enough. Linda helped set up for the weekly board luncheon, arranged flowers in the meeting rooms, and restocked the bar. But she could feel the shift in atmosphere. Whispered conversations that stopped when she approached, sympathetic glances from Janet and the other long-term staff, the careful distance maintained by newer employees who didn't want guilt by association. At 10:30 a.m., Linda was cleaning glassware when Janet approached with unusual urgency. "Linda, you need to see this," Janet whispered, holding up her phone. "Emma Pemberton is in the children's activity room, and well, you should just come look." Confused, Linda followed Janet down the hallway toward the club's childcare area where members' children could play, while their parents attended meetings or social events. Through the observation window, they could see 8-year-old Emma Pemberton sitting at a small table with several other children. But instead of playing games or coloring, she was holding what appeared to be an impromptu press conference. "Mommy was really mean to Miss Linda," Emma was saying to her audience of wide-eyed peers. "Miss Linda tried to help fix the computer for charity, but Mommy said mean things and made her cry." Linda's heart clenched. She hadn't realized Emma had witnessed her tears after the confrontation. "But Miss Linda is really, really smart," Emma continued with 8-year-old earnestness. "I heard her talking about databases and protocols and stuff that sounded super complicated. Mommy didn't even listen. She just was mean because Miss Linda brings us juice boxes instead of wearing fancy dresses." One of the other children, a boy about Emma's age, raised his hand. "Is that why your mommy is always angry? Because she doesn't like people who aren't rich?" Emma considered this question with the brutal honesty of childhood. "I think maybe Mommy forgot that being nice is more important than having money. Miss Linda is always nice to everyone. She remembers my name and asks about my school projects. Sometimes I think Miss Linda is nicer than lots of the fancy ladies." The children's caregiver, Mrs. Peterson, was clearly uncomfortable with the conversation, but seemed unsure how to redirect it without making the situation worse. Linda felt tears, threatening again, but this time they weren't tears of humiliation. This innocent, observant child, had seen through all the social hierarchies and artificial barriers to recognize basic human decency. "We should go," Janet whispered. "If Margaret finds out Emma is talking about this—" But Linda couldn't move. She watched as Emma continued her earnest defense of someone she barely knew, motivated by nothing more than an 8-year-old's sense of fairness and justice. That's when inspiration struck. "Janet," Linda said quietly, "is the board meeting still happening in Conference Room A?" Yes, but Linda, you can't just— I'm not going to interrupt the meeting, Linda said. I'm going to fix their problem. Before Janet could protest further, Linda was walking purposefully toward the club's main office. She had worked here long enough to know the layout, to understand the routines, to move through the space without attracting attention. The club's IT closet was located behind the main office, a small room filled with servers, routers, and networking, equipment that most of the staff avoided like the plague. Linda had noticed during her years of service that the technical contractors who maintained the system were often frustrated by outdated hardware and poor configuration. Using her master key, a privilege of senior catering staff who needed access for event setup, Linda slipped into the IT closet. The familiar hum of servers and blinking LED lights felt like coming home. She pulled out her phone and photographed the current server configuration, documenting the exact setup before making any changes. If this went wrong, she could restore everything to its original state. Then Linda got to work. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, adjusting memory allocation settings, updating database connection strings, optimizing cache parameters. Each modification was precise, methodical, based on the analysis she had spent hours perfecting. The auction platform that had crashed so spectacularly during the gala was running on the same server infrastructure used for the club's reservation system, membership database, and event management software. Linda's improvements would benefit far more than just future charity auctions. As she worked, Linda felt a sense of profound rightness she hadn't experienced in years. This was who she was, not just a server who happened to understand technology, but a systems analyst who happened to be serving tables to support her family. 45 minutes later, Linda had implemented every critical fix from her technical analysis. The system was running smoother than it had in months, with improved response times and enhanced stability protocols. She restored the original appearance of the server room, leaving no trace of her presence except for dramatically improved performance. But Linda wasn't finished. She returned to her locker and retrieved her printed analysis, all 47 pages, of technical documentation. Instead of taking it to HR or leaving it for Margaret to dismiss, Linda made a different choice. She walked to the main reception desk, where Patricia Chen, no relation, despite the shared surname, was handling member inquiries and phone calls. "Patricia," Linda said quietly, "could you make sure this gets delivered to Mr. Harrison? It's technical documentation about the auction system problems." Patricia glanced at the thick document with curiosity. "What should I tell him it's regarding?" Linda smiled. "Tell him it's a comprehensive solution to prevent future technical failures at charity events. Tell him the implementation has already been completed, and the system is now running at optimal performance levels." She paused, then added, "And tell him that Linda Chen takes responsibility for all modifications made to the server configuration." As Linda walked away, she felt lighter than she had in years. Not because she had solved a technical problem, that was the easy part, but because she had finally stopped hiding who she was. Whether Margaret Pemberton fired her or not, whether the board appreciated her expertise or not, Linda had done something important today. She had used her skills to benefit children who needed educational funding, and she had done it without compromise or apology. Sometimes the best solutions happen quietly, in server rooms and IT closets, implemented by people the world has forgotten to notice. But not always. Sometimes those solutions get noticed in ways that change everything. At 2:15 p.m., Linda was arranging centerpieces for the evening cocktail reception when Patricia Chen hurried across the main dining room, her heels clicking urgently against the wavy marble floor. "Linda," she whispered breathlessly, "Mr. Harrison wants to see you in his office." Now. Linda's stomach dropped. This was it. The formal termination meeting she had been expecting. At least she had managed to implement the system. Improvements before being escorted out. Did he say what it was about? Linda asked, though she already knew. Patricia shook her head, but her expression was curious rather than sympathetic. He just said it was urgent, and to bring you immediately. He looked, I don't know, surprised? Excited, maybe? Linda smoothed her uniform and followed Patricia through the club's administrative corridor. She had only been in the executive offices once before, during her initial hiring interview 3 years ago. The mahogany-paneled walls and oil portraits of past club presidents felt intimidating, designed to remind visitors of their place in the hierarchy. Robert Harrison's office door was open, but Linda could hear voices inside, not just Robert's, but others as well. As she approached, she realized Margaret Pemberton was there, along with 2 other people she didn't recognize. "Linda," Robert called out, spotting her in the doorway. "Please, come in. Close the door behind you." Linda entered the spacious office, noting the tension in the room immediately. Margaret was seated rigidly in one of the leather chairs, her face pale and her lips pressed into a thin line. The 2 strangers, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and a younger man with a tablet, watched Linda with keen interest. "Linda, I'd like you to meet Dr. Sarah Mitchell from the Children's Education Foundation and Kevin Torres from Dataflow Systems, the company that manages our auction platform." Linda's heart began racing. This wasn't a termination meeting. Dr. Mitchell stood and extended her hand. "Ms. Chen, I understand you've identified the cause of our technical difficulties at the gala." Linda shook the offered hand, confused by the respectful tone. Yes, ma'am. I provided Mr. Harrison with a technical analysis." Kevin Torres leaned forward eagerly. "Ms. Chen, I've been working with auction management systems for 12 years, and I have to say, your documentation is the most comprehensive system analysis I've ever reviewed. You identified vulnerabilities that our own technical team missed completely." "I don't understand," Linda said quietly, glancing around the room. Margaret refused to meet her eyes. Robert Harrison gestured for Linda to sit in the remaining chair. "Linda, after you submitted your report this morning, I shared it with Dr. Mitchell and asked Dataflow to review your findings. Kevin drove up from downtown specifically to discuss your recommendations." Dr. Mitchell spoke next, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to managing multi-million-dollar budgets. "Ms. Chen, your analysis indicates that the technical failure at our gala wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of system instability that could affect future events. Is that correct?" "Yes, ma'am," Linda replied. "The cascade failure was preventable with proper configuration, but the underlying architecture has several critical vulnerabilities that need to be addressed for long-term stability." Kevin nodded enthusiastically. "She's absolutely right. The modifications she implemented this morning have already improved system performance by 37%. Response times are faster, memory usage is optimized, and the database indexing is running more efficiently than it has since installation." Linda blinked in surprise. "You monitored the changes?" "We monitor all system modifications automatically," Kevin explained. "When the performance metrics suddenly jumped this morning, I thought there had been a hardware upgrade. Imagine my surprise when I realized someone had optimized the entire server configuration using techniques I hadn't seen outside of Fortune 500 implementations." Margaret finally spoke, her voice tight with controlled anger. "I still don't understand why we're treating this as some kind of achievement. She accessed restricted systems without authorization. This is a security violation, not a success story." Dr. Mitchell turned to Margaret with the expression that could have frozen fire. Mrs. Pemberton, Ms. Chen's unauthorized access just saved our foundation from potentially catastrophic technical failures at future events. More importantly, her solutions could prevent other charitable organizations from experiencing similar disasters. But she's just a... Margaret began, then stopped herself. She's just a what, Mrs. Pemberton? Dr. Mitchell's voice was dangerously quiet. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Linda watched Margaret struggle with words she couldn't say out loud. In this context, she's just a server. She's just hired help. She's just someone who isn't supposed to know these things. Robert Harrison cleared his throat. Linda, I need to ask you directly. What is your background in systems analysis? Because frankly, this level of expertise doesn't typically come from casual interest. Linda looked around the room, at Robert's curious expression, Kevin's professional admiration, Dr. Mitchell's expectant face, and Margaret's barely controlled fury. She thought about 8 years of hiding who she was, 8 years of accepting invisibility for Sophie's sake, 8 years of letting people assume she had always been what she appeared to be in the moment. Then she thought about Emma Pemberton's innocent defense of basic human decency, about $80,000 in lost educational funding, about all the other charity events that might benefit from proper technical management. I was a senior systems analyst at Technocore Industries for 6 years, Linda said clearly. I specialized in database architecture and platform integration for Fortune 500 clients. I left the technology industry 8 years ago to raise my adopted daughter. Kevin's eyes widened. Technocore Industries. Linda, what was your surname there? Zhao. Linda Zhao. Kevin actually gasped. Your L. Zhao. The Linda Zhao who developed the dynamic resource allocation protocol that revolutionized database performance management? Linda nodded slowly. Holy shit, Kevin breathed, then immediately apologized for his language. I'm sorry, but... Dr. Mitchell, you don't understand. Linda Zhao's work is legendary in database administration circles. Her algorithms are still being used by major corporations. I studied her implementations in graduate school. Dr. Mitchell was staring at Linda with new understanding. Ms. Zhao, Ms. Chen, why didn't you mention your background when we were struggling with technical issues? Because nobody asked, Linda said simply. And because in my experience, people have trouble believing that expertise can come in unexpected packages. Margaret's face had gone through several color changes during this exchange, finally settling on a sickly greenish white. Robert Harrison leaned back in his chair. Margaret, you were present during the gala. When Ms. Chen offered to help with the technical problems, what exactly was your response? Margaret's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The situation was complex. We had protocols to follow. The protocols, Dr. Mitchell said coldly, cost our foundation $80,000 in lost donations and nearly destroyed our relationship with this club. Meanwhile, the woman who could have prevented the entire disaster was dismissed because she was wearing a server's uniform instead of a designer dress. Linda watched Margaret shrink under the combined weight of professional judgment and social consequence. For the first time in 3 years, their positions were reversed. Margaret was the one being evaluated and found wanting. Furthermore, Dr. Mitchell continued, I understand that Ms. Chen was publicly humiliated and accused of potential sabotage. Is that accurate, Mrs. Pemberton? Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. There may have been some miscommunication. Miscommunication, Kevin interjected. Ma'am, with all due respect, Linda Zhao has more technical expertise than anyone else in this room. Accusing her of sabotage is like accusing Mozart of ruining a piano recital. Robert Harrison stood up, his expression grim. Margaret, I think we need to have a separate conversation about leadership judgment and appropriate treatment of staff. Dr. Mitchell, Kevin, would you give us a few minutes? But Dr. Mitchell wasn't finished. She turned to Linda with genuine respect and curiosity. Ms. Chen, I have a proposition for you. The Children's Education Foundation manages technical systems for dozens of charitable organizations across the state. We've been looking for a consulting director to oversee technology implementation and optimization. The position offers flexibility for family obligations, competitive compensation, and the opportunity to ensure that technical failures never, again, cost vulnerable children desperately needed resources. Linda felt her world shifting on its axis. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you the chance to use your expertise to help children while maintaining the work-life balance that's clearly important to you. You'd be consulting with charitable organizations, implementing the kinds of system improvements you've documented here, preventing the waste of resources that should go to education and social services. For the first time in 8 years, Linda was being offered professional recognition that didn't require choosing between career advancement and being present for Sophie. She looked at Margaret, who was staring at the floor, finally understanding the magnitude of her misjudgment. Then Linda looked back at Dr. Mitchell. I'd be very interested in discussing the details, Linda said. In that quiet office, the invisible woman in the server's uniform had finally been seen. Not as Margaret Pemberton's social inferior, but as Linda Zhao, the systems analyst, whose expertise could change lives and protect resources meant for children who desperately needed them. Sometimes recognition comes from the least expected places, delivered by people who understand that competence and compassion matter more than social status or designer clothing. And sometimes 8-year-olds are the wisest people in the room. 2 weeks later, Linda walked into the Riverside Country Club for the last time as a member of the catering staff. She wore her simple black uniform one final time, but everything else had changed. The way people looked at her, spoke to her, treated her. It was as if the revelation of her true expertise had lifted an invisibility cloak she didn't realize she had been wearing. The transformation had been swift and thorough. Dr. Mitchell had moved quickly to bring Linda aboard as the Children's Education Foundation's Director of Technology Consulting, with a salary that nearly tripled her country club wages and benefits. That included flexible scheduling for Sophie's school activities. But more than the professional vindication, Linda was experiencing something she hadn't felt in years: the deep satisfaction of being valued for her mind rather than her service. Janet Morrison approached as Linda was cleaning out her locker, her eyes bright with vicarious pride. I still can't believe Margaret Pemberton's face when she realized who you really were, Janet chuckled. I've worked here 15 years, and I've never seen anyone turn that particular shade of green before. Linda smiled, folding her uniform for the last time. I feel a little sorry for her, actually. She missed out on a solution to her problems because she couldn't see past her own assumptions. Sorry for her? Janet's eyebrows shot up. Linda, she humiliated you in front of 50 people and accused you of sabotage. The woman got exactly what she deserved. What Janet didn't know was that Margaret Pemberton's consequences had extended far beyond personal embarrassment. The Children's Education Foundation Board had indeed moved their annual gala to the Metropolitan Hotel, taking with them not just their significant rental fees, but also their network of corporate sponsors who valued professional competence over social connections. Robert Harrison had been forced to address the board of directors about leadership failures and the loss of one of their most profitable annual events. Margaret's position as social coordinator was being restructured, a polite euphemism for significant reduction in authority and influence. But Linda had also heard through the staff grapevine that Margaret's 8-year-old daughter had been asking difficult questions at home. Why was Mommy mean to Miss Linda? Why didn't Mommy listen when Miss Linda tried to help? Why did being rich make some people forget to be nice? Children have a way of cutting through adult complexity to reach uncomfortable truths. As Linda packed the last of her personal items, she heard familiar small footsteps in the hallway. Emma Pemberton appeared in the doorway, her school backpack bouncing against her legs as she approached. "Miss Linda? Are you really leaving?" Linda knelt down to Emma's eye level, seeing the genuine sadness in the child's face. "I am, sweetheart. I'm starting a new job where I'll help lots of children get better educations." Emma's eyes widened with the kind of wonder that only 8-year-olds can muster. "You mean like a superhero, but for schools?" Linda laughed, the first truly joyful sound she had made in the club's hallways. "Something like that, yes." "I'm glad," Emma said with characteristic childhood honesty. "You were always the nicest person here, and I told Mommy that being mean to nice people is wrong, even if they wear different clothes than us." Linda felt her heart squeeze with affection for this wise little girl. "Emma, can I tell you something important?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Always remember that people's worth has nothing to do with their job title or how much money they have. Some of the most brilliant, kind, wonderful people in the world might be serving your lunch, or cleaning your classroom, or fixing your computer. Treat everyone with respect, okay?" "I will," Emma promised, with 8-year-old sincerity. Then she threw her arms around Linda in a spontaneous hug. "I'm going to miss you, Miss Linda." As Emma skipped away, Linda reflected on the strange chain of events that had led to this moment. If Margaret Pemberton had simply listened 3 weeks ago, Linda might have quietly fixed the auction system and returned to invisible service. Instead, Margaret's dismissiveness had set in motion a series of revelations that changed everything. Later that afternoon, Linda attended the staff farewell gathering Janet had organized in the employee break room. It was a modest celebration: cake from the club's kitchen, coffee and paper cups, and genuine warmth from people who had worked alongside her for 3 years. "Speech!" called out Marcus from maintenance, a kind man who had always treated Linda with respect regardless of their respective positions in the club hierarchy. Linda stood, looking around at faces that had become familiar over 3 years of shared shifts and small kindnesses. "I want to thank all of you for being my colleagues and friends," she began. "Working here taught me that dignity isn't about your job title. It's about how you treat people and how you let yourself be treated. You all showed me that respect is earned through character, not costume." She paused, thinking about Margaret Pemberton's humiliation and Emma's wisdom. "But mostly, you taught me that being invisible doesn't mean being worthless. Sometimes the most important work happens in the background, noticed only by the people who matter most." The applause was warm and genuine. These were people who understood the value of work that society often overlooked, who recognized competence regardless of its packaging. As the gathering wound down, Linda made her way through the club one final time. In the main dining room, where Margaret Pemberton had dismissed her expertise so publicly, members were enjoying their afternoon cocktails, unaware that the woman refilling their water glasses had been replaced by someone whose technical expertise would soon be helping charitable organizations across 3 states. Linda paused at the entrance to take a final look at the marble floors and crystal chandeliers that had defined her world for 3 years. This place had been both a refuge and a prison, providing stability for Sophie, while slowly erasing Linda Zhao's professional identity. But now Linda understood something crucial. She didn't have to choose between being Linda Chen, the dedicated guardian, and Linda Zhao, the systems analyst. She could be both, honoring Sophie's need for stability while also honoring her own intellectual capabilities. As she walked through the club's front entrance for the last time, Linda pulled out her phone and called Sophie's school. "Hi, this is Linda Chen. I wanted to let you know that I'll be able to volunteer for the computer lab project after all. I have some experience with educational technology systems that might be helpful." Outside, the autumn sun was setting over Riverside, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Linda Chen walked to her car with her head held high. No longer invisible, no longer apologetic for being exactly who she was. Tomorrow, she would begin helping charitable organizations optimize their technology systems, ensuring that technical failures never again cost vulnerable children desperately needed resources. But tonight, she would go home to Sophie and celebrate. The fact that sometimes justice comes in the most unexpected forms. Sometimes it comes from 8-year-old children who see through adult prejudices to recognize basic human decency. Sometimes it comes from professionals who value expertise over appearances. And sometimes it comes from having the courage to stop hiding who you really are. Linda Zhao was back. And this time, she was bringing Linda Chen with her. 6 months later, the Riverside Community Center buzzed with excitement as Linda addressed a packed auditorium. The audience was diverse: nonprofit directors, school administrators, parent volunteers, and dozens of children from the various organizations that had benefited from her technology consulting work. She stood at the podium wearing a professional blazer and the confident smile of someone who had found her true calling. Behind her, a large screen displayed before and after statistics, database efficiency improvements, cost savings from optimized systems, and most importantly, increased funding for educational programs due to streamlined operations. "When I started this work," Linda said, her voice carrying clearly through the space, "I thought I was just fixing computer problems. But what I've learned is that technology consulting for nonprofits isn't really about servers and software. It's about ensuring that every dollar donated to help children reaches its intended destination efficiently and effectively." In the front row, Sophie, now 9 years old and bursting with pride, beamed at her adoptive mother. Beside her sat Emma Pemberton, whose friendship had blossomed once the social barriers had been removed. The two girls had become constant companions, proving that genuine connections transcend economic boundaries. "This year alone," Linda continued, "the organizations we've worked with have saved over $400,000 in operational costs through improved technology. Management, that's $400,000 that went directly to educational programs, school supplies, and scholarship funds instead of being lost to inefficient systems." The applause was thunderous. These weren't polite society claps, but genuine appreciation from people who understood the real-world impact of Linda's expertise. In the back of the auditorium, partially hidden behind a column, Margaret Pemberton sat quietly. She had come at Emma's insistence, despite the obvious discomfort of facing her own prejudices made manifest. Over the past months, watching her daughter's friendship with Sophie and hearing Emma's constant praise for Miss Linda, Margaret had been forced to confront some uncomfortable truths about her own behavior and assumptions. As Linda concluded her presentation, she made eye contact with Margaret and offered a slight nod. Not of forgiveness, exactly, but of recognition that people can grow and change when they're willing to examine their own biases. "In closing," Linda said, "I want to leave you with the most important lesson I've learned. Expertise has no uniform. Wisdom has no price tag. And the most valuable solutions often come from the most unexpected sources. Never dismiss someone's potential contribution based on their appearance or their current circumstances. You might be overlooking exactly the help you need." The standing ovation lasted for 3 full minutes. As Linda stepped down from the podium, Sophie rushed forward for a hug, followed by Emma. "Aunt Linda," Sophie whispered, "I'm so proud of you for helping so many kids." Linda held both girls close, understanding finally that her greatest success wasn't in database optimization or system architecture. It was in teaching the next generation that respect, competence, and compassion were the only currencies that truly mattered. Sometimes the people we dismiss as invisible hold the power to change the world. Sometimes an 8-year-old's sense of justice can expose adult prejudices. And sometimes the best revenge against those who underestimate us is simply becoming everything they never imagined we could be. Linda Chenjiao had learned to honor both sides of her identity, the loving guardian and the technical expert, the humble service worker, and the database revolutionary. In finding that balance, she had discovered something more valuable than any corporate salary or social status: the profound satisfaction of using her gifts to make the world better for the children who needed it most. In the end, that was the only recognition that truly mattered.